All right, Chapter 2. Chapter 2. Oh boy. Chapter 2 focuses on the League of Nations in the 1920s. And before we get into it really quick, let's just kind of stop and figure out where we are because we just finished imperialism, focused of Chapter 1. Imperialism, foreign policy of extending political or economic influence over another place for some sort of gain. New imperialism is going to be the focus here, so we're going to have European countries going and imperializing Africa and also Asia. Africa being that in focus of new imperialism compared to like old imperialism, which focused on the Americas. But from imperialism, we're mostly going to see conflict and alliances as a result of imperialist policies. We're going to see the rise of Japan and the United States as they rapidly modernize, and as a result of imperialism and industrialization, alliances are going to pull countries into World War One. The Allied powers are going to be victorious in World War One, and the United States is going to emerge as the most powerful nation of the world at the end of the war by 1919. And this is going to slide us right into 1920. So, what do the 1920s look like? Well, the world is going to emerge from World War One very, very different than it was before. Maps are going to be redrawn. Countries have changed. Territory gains and losses, or just new countries or territories or successor states. Power is going to shift. Countries have to decide how to move forward after the war, and some are going to struggle, some are going to do well, and that kind of leads us right into what we're going at here. So again, the title of the chapter is League of Nations 1920s, and by the way, this is a paper 2 topic. The first section of the chapter 2.1 is going to ask, why was there dissatisfaction with the peace settlements of 1919 to 1920, and mainly this is talking about the Paris Peace Conference, the peace conference that are going to hammer out a resolution to World War One. So the first country we got to talk about is Russia, and this is going to take us a bit of a step back to 1917. During World War I, Russia is going to drop out to fight their own revolution. Treaty of Brest-Litovsk is going to be signed between Russia and Germany that allows Russia to drop out of the war and cede a bunch of land that contains about 25% of its people and resources to Germany as a consolation prize. Now, once Russia drops out of the war, they are going to be fighting their own revolution. You're going to have Vladimir Lenin. He's going to lead the Bolsheviks, the communists, to turn Russia communist. Communism, if you forgot, is an extremist ideology that seeks to create an equal society by eliminating social classes and putting the government in charge of the means of production. This way, the government can guarantee everyone has a job, everyone gets the same amount of money. Again, the government is meant to guarantee equality. Now, Russia's going to become communist, and this is going to be a source of contention in itself because communism is not very much well liked. Remember, it's an extremist ideology. So Russia's going to become pretty isolated from other nations. Nations are going to be weary of communism. So now Russia's going to be very isolated, and it's not even really going to be involved in the Paris Peace Conference. Involved in the Paris Peace Conference is going to be many countries, but all represented by the Big Three. The Big Three are the United States, France, and the UK. Each of them are going to have different wants and needs, and they are going to be in charge of negotiating some sort of peace deal at the Paris Peace Conference, also on behalf of the other nations that are involved as well. This is going to be a huge source of contention from the Paris Peace Conference, and also why the treaties that come from it are going to be very unpopular. Everyone has different wants and needs. Not everyone is going to get what they want. Again, all these countries are going to have different wants and needs, and speaking of having different wants and needs, the Big Three, well, there's not even much consensus in terms of like how to proceed in just punishing Germany and the losers of the war, because you have France, led by George Clemenceau, nicknamed the Tiger for how harsh he is. France has bad blood with Germany going all the way back to the 1870s. Germany ran over France during World War One. They have always been rivals. France wants Germany to be punished to the point of no return. The UK is going to be led by Lloyd George. Lloyd George wants Germany to be punished, but also able to recoup so they could become economically viable as like a trade partner in the future, because Britain now has to recover from World War One, and well, they think Germany could help them do it. US, led by President Woodrow Wilson, really does not want Germany to be punished too much out of fear that it will lead to the same exact situation. Woodrow Wilson wanted peace without victory, no winners, no losers, just countries working together to keep peace. And if that sounds familiar, maybe also his 14 points of peace that were established before the US really even got their boots on the ground over in Europe. But the 14 points of peace was Woodrow Wilson's plan for what he wanted to see after World War One. So the US, UK, France, they all have different goals, and the other nations represented at the Paris Peace Conference, they all have different wants and needs. Germany, which, by the way, Germany is now kind of called the Weimar Republic at this point, they're also incredibly weak in their government and their economy. Anyway, Germany expected a peace settlement to be in line with Woodrow Wilson's 14 points, and also Woodrow Wilson obviously wanted the 14 points to be the groundwork of the peace treaty that they wound up hammering out. But does that happen? All the countries involved, they have different wants and goals, and that means we really aren't going to get much consensus on how we put together a peace treaty, peace treaties, potentially. Take a look at this political cartoon. It's called the European Baby Show.
All the babies, they're screaming and crying because that's what babies do when they want something. But each baby is a different country. They're all crying because they all want something different. The claims they are representing, that's what they want, the different things that they think they need or deserve, whatever. Now, these things, they could be even conflicting amongst themselves, which could create even more contention or more trouble. But the figure standing up is Woodrow Wilson. He's the one who's trying to quell all the babies with his 14 points, that plan that he put together before the war even ended. But obviously this isn't working. This lack of agreement and consensus is going to cause a lot of trouble at the Paris Peace Conference, to the point where there's going to be several different peace treaties that end World War I. First up, main treaty. Treaty of Versailles. Treaty of Versailles is the main treaty that comes from the Paris Peace Conference, and it mostly deals with Germany. Now, even though that it mostly deals with Germany, Germany was not allowed to be a part of negotiating this treaty in any way, shape, or form, and they ultimately are going to be forced to accept it, so they do not negotiate any of it, and they're forced to accept whatever it says. That's kind of a hint on how it's going to turn out. But anyway, most of it just deals with punishing Germany. Germany, they are going to lose plenty of land. This land is going to be taken and made into new territories or successor states. Successor states are just land that were made from the territories that are losers of the war. They're going to lose the Rhineland. It's going to be split in half and demilitarized. This is a border with France, so France is going to get a little bit more border security now that the Rhineland is split up. German land in Prussia, also Russian land from the Treaty of Brest-Litovsk, is going to get turned into Poland. That was one of the points, actually. Successor state. Other land gained from the treaty are going to be made independent. Some are also going to become mandates, which means that the land is put under the watch of another more established country. Some are given plebiscite. Plebiscites just means you get to vote on which country you wanted to join. Now, Germany also could not join or form any alliances, and they also had to reduce their armaments. This is kind of a point. They couldn't have any more than 100,000 soldiers. The Paris Peace Conference established that this number is probably a good enough number to where they can just barely defend themselves. Now, other establishments of the Treaty of Versailles. Big one, the War Guilt Clause. War Guilt Clause was a clause that blamed Germany for starting the war. Since Germany was at fault for starting the war, this allowed other nations to impose reparations. Reparations are money that you have to pay for damages that you cause. In this case, Germany, being the main aggressor of the war, they're going to have to pay for the damages of the war. So Germany starts it, they pay for it. Germany after World War I was weak. Their government was unstable. Their economy was terrible. They didn't have any money to pay for this, and they're going to protest this mucho because they say that this will economically ruin them. We'll see how this turns out. Another big one. Treaty of Versailles is going to establish the League of Nations. This is another point of peace of Woodrow Wilson's 14 points. League of Nations, just a group of nations working together to hopefully keep peace after World War I. It's going to be negotiated by, again, David Lloyd George for the UK, Clemenceau for France, and Woodrow Wilson for the US. Now, during the war, the US, they start out not really wanting to get involved. Once it starts over in Europe in 1914, the US wanted to stay isolationist, but eventually they get drawn into the war. As the war goes on, support kind of gains for it, but once the end comes around in a short time that the US was involved, people are going to see the cost in terms of dollars, lives, resources, and they're going to want to go back to isolationism, and that's exactly what the United States does. Woodrow Wilson, when he comes back home from negotiating the Paris Peace Conference, he's going to find very little support for the Treaty of Versailles back in the United States. This is a peace treaty that he negotiated, but unfortunately for him, ratifying the treaty is the job of Congress, not the president. So Congress is going to wind up failing to actually ratify the Treaty of Versailles. Instead, they're going to favor a return to isolationist foreign policy, not being involved in the affairs of other countries. This means the U.S. is not going to join the League of Nations. The League of Nations is that group of nations meant to keep peace after World War I. It was literally the brainchild of Woodrow Wilson. It was his 14th point. And the most powerful nation in the world not joining this group of nations meant to keep peace, again, kind of tells you how it's going to go. Now, that's how the United States feels about the Treaty of Versailles. Well, what about the other country it actually deals with, Germany? Well, Germany does not like the terms of the Treaty of Versailles, but they can't really do anything about it. They were not allowed to take part in any of the negotiations, and they are forced to accept it. They refer to it as a diktat in terms of the forced peace that they are forced to accept, which to them it really isn't peace. Germany's going to argue that the terms of the treaty are unfair, especially since they didn't negotiate it. They're going to claim that the terms of disarmament, only being limited to 100,000 troops, is not enough to defend themselves. Germany is going to stress that the land that was taken away by the Treaty of Versailles is being given to their rival, to which they claim is unfair, but they're forced to accept it anyway. There's nothing they could do. Germany expected something in line with Woodrow Wilson's 14 points, and some of the 14 points are kind of sprinkled here and there throughout the treaty and other treaties, but all the treaties really are just kind of a hodgepodge mix of incoherency that is all the country's wants and needs. all the countries besides Germany's, that is. Onto the other treaties. There are a few others. Treaty 2, Treaty of Saint-Germain. This deals with Austria. Austria and Hungary are going to be split up into two separate countries. It is going to take territory from Austria and give it to other countries and make them into successor states. Treaty 3, Treaty of Neuilly, deals with Bulgaria. This takes territory away from Bulgaria, forces them to reduce their armaments, and it assigns them $400 million in reparations that don't really wound up being paid ever. They were paid for like a couple years, but then just stopped. Treaty 4, Treaty of Sevres, deals with the Ottoman Empire. One of the goals of the Treaty of Sevres was to break up the Ottoman Empire, and eventually it does. It takes some of their territory and redistributes it, forces them to open up the trade port of Dardanelles. In terms of breaking up the Ottoman Empire, it created a lot of instability, and that instability is going to be taken advantage of in 1923 when Kemal Ataturk leads a rebellion against the Ottoman Empire and establishes the Republic of Turkey. And from this, he is going to argue that since the Treaty of Sevres was established with the Ottoman Empire, it does not apply to the Republic of Turkey, and he's going to therefore aim to eliminate any foreign influence over Turkey. Treaty number 5, Treaty of Trianon, it deals with Hungary, and it just takes territory away from Hungary and redistributes it amongst new successor states, plebiscites, mandates. But all of these treaties, they are meant to inflict punishment on the Central Powers, those who lost the war. Woodrow Wilson's plea for peace without victory is not really going to be achieved, although some of his 14 points can be seen here and there. You are going to see more independent nations. You are going to see successor states. You are going to see redrawing of the maps of Europe's and different borders. You are going to see some disarmament in terms of the aggressors or the losers of the war, and by far that means less militarism, hopefully. And you are also going to see a League of Nations, although without the most powerful nation of the world, the United States and America. Now, what are the impacts of the Treaty of Versailles? Well, again, you have redrawn maps, but now you're also going to have people who live under unfriendly governments. For example, you're going to have Hungarians, from Hungary, under the control of Romania, or Germans in the Rhineland under the control of France. You're going to have people under governments that don't actually support them. You're going to have new countries, but with little support. You're going to have successor states that are just starting out, but they're going to be weak in government and also their economics. That gives them not really too much chance for survival after that. Reparations is going to be a big one. Money paid for damages caused during the war. War clause means that countries could impose reparations since Germany was at fault for the war. War clause, again, means that Germany is assigned most of the blame for starting World War I. Reparations is a huge disagreement between the big three. France, they wanted Germany to be punished till like the end of time and to never come to power again. UK was kind of like a middle ground, punish Germany, but also allow them to recoup later on so they could become an economic ally. The US was mostly opposed to reparations since they believed it would lead back to conflict and resentment, which obviously it eventually does. But reparations happen anyway. Germany is charged about 6 billion euros. Germany tries to protest, but they don't succeed in any way, shape, or form. Germany knows that they can't pay this. No one really wants to listen. Bulgaria is also charged reparations too. But what are the impacts of reparations on Germany? Well, Germany, as we've established, cannot pay reparations. Their economy is a mess. The Weimar Republic is weak in terms of the government and the economy, and most economists at the time argued that reparations would just lead to inflation, which would sink Germany further, which is really exactly what happens. Inflation, value of currency goes down, prices goes up. As prices goes up, wages do not. Since wages don't rise with costs, people can't afford goods. This is going to lead to high unemployment, and in Germany, it's going to lead to hyperinflation, where the costs are going to skyrocket astronomically. In 1920s to Germany, a loaf of bread cost hundreds of millions of German marks. Now, those hundreds of millions of German marks might sound like a lot of money, but remember, inflation drives the value of money so far down that prices skyrocket. That hundreds of billions of German marks were probably the equivalent of not even a US dollar at the time period. So this is going to make the German economy and government even worse off than it was before. Look at this political cartoon real quick. Reparations, giant money bag, are literally crushing that person who represents Germany. This is how it was. Reparations would continue to bring tension and potential conflict throughout the 1920s. And speaking of tension, successor states, they are going to face numerous problems as well. Keep in mind, most of these places have new governments and economies. It's kind of hard to get them off the ground quickly without having their own economic output or major support from other places. Yugoslavia, made up of formerly Serbia and Montenegro, had people of a bunch of different ethnicities, nationalities, and also religious backgrounds. This is going to create a lot of conflict between them. There's going to be disputes between the people, and this is going to lead to more instability. Turns into a dictatorship in 1929, but remained weak due to a limited industry, poor agriculture, and an overdependence on money from other more developed nations. Poland, 27 million people were there. 66% of that were Polish. About 1 million were German from that lost territory. And a bunch of other different political parties as well mixed in there. Now, these differences create an unstable government, eventually leads to a dictatorship in 1926. The Polish government then wants to expand beyond what the Paris Peace Conference actually gave them, and they wind up invading Ukraine. But Ukraine was supported by Russia. Russia backs off Poland. Poland winds up fighting a small war with Russia. It's known as the Polish-Soviet War. It occurs like 1920, 1921. It ends with the Treaty of Riga, which we'll mention later. But this gives Poland a small sliver of extra land. Czechoslovakia, again, large mix of different people, also includes Germans, something to keep in mind for later, but plenty of raw materials and agricultural land. This is going to benefit them more than most other of these successor states because they wind up a little bit more self-sufficient. They wind up developing allies with other more developed nations like France, and they're not totally doomed. Austria is landlocked, which kind of sets them up for failure, but regardless, most of the valuable areas of Austria were taken away by the Treaty of Saint-Germain, and Austria's economic problems were also going to be imposed by the Treaty of Saint-Germain. Austrian people believe that the solution to their economic problems was a union with Germany, which in the 1930s becomes the Anschluss, but that would violate the Treaty of Versailles, and that would never, ever happen, right? Anyway, since the economy is horrible, Austria commits to not joining with the Germans just yet in order to receive foreign loans that keep them afloat. Last one, Hungary. Absolute chaos in Hungary's government after World War I. Communists take control of the government for a short amount of time and consolidate power against non-communists. Communists then invade Czechoslovakia, only to be stopped by France, ally of Czechoslovakia. Communist government then collapses. Anti-communist government takes control of the government and then consolidates against the communists. Hungary winds up being unhappy with the Paris Peace Conference because they lost a good amount of their land and about 66% of its population to successor states. Hungary then suffers from economic problems, so they take foreign loans as well. That's going to pretty much do it for why all these different places were not entirely satisfied with the Paris Peace Conference settlements and the treaties that came from it. So real quick, let's go back to that question. Why were these countries dissatisfied with the Paris Peace Conference? There's very little consensus on what to actually accomplish. Different countries have different wants and different needs and different goals. Most of the successor states that are set up, their governments are weak, their economies are weak, they can't really get off the ground all that quickly. It's just generally unpopular. The Paris Peace Conference and the treaties that came from it, especially the Treaty of Versailles, were incredibly unpopular. Depending on what point of view you look at, they were either too harsh, or they were too lenient, or they created resentment, or not everyone got what they wanted or expected. And it was just a giant mess of trying to balance what countries wanted with what they could get and what they could give, and the needs of others as well. So there you go. That's going to do it for the first section of Chapter 2. Moving on, the next, we'll see you soon.